Hey guys, tonight's story starts with a ticking clock, a rusted vault door, and a name scribbled in the margins of a book no one admits to owning. You followed a paper trail through history's attic, past revolutions, stock crashes, and dusty cigar smoke. And at the center of it all, one family with fingers in every ledger and eyes that always seem to know what comes next. Not kings, not thieves, something older and much, much wealthier. But before you get too cozy, take a second to gently tap that new hype button YouTube just added. It really does help little guys like me push through the algorithm. And be sure to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now, get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. You're sitting in a bank that's mostly made of size and expensive dust. The walls are high and unnecessarily judgmental. The chairs are older than your great-aunt's pessimism, and every single one of them squeaks in a different regional dialect when you shift your weight. The smell is a combination of boiled leather, stale ambition, and a hint of licorice so faint it might be imaginary. The ceiling is painted, but no one's looked up long enough to care what it's about. You assume it's something financial, or tragic, or both. A clerk slides a stack of parchment toward you with the precision of a man who once ironed a receipt. He has thin lips, a thinner mustache, and eyes like they've watched too many people ask the same stupid question. You haven't even opened your mouth yet. He already hates you a little. You try to look official, but your coat squeaks when you breathe. That doesn't help. You flip through the papers, which are covered in a mixture of ink, flourishes, and what you're fairly certain is Latin for pay up. Names scroll past in loops and swoops and aggressive calligraphy. Then you see it. Rothschild. Again, Rothschild. Then again, different first names, different cities, but the same surname tucked into corner margins, stamped with seals, floating just above signatures like a watermark of quiet power. You ask the clerk, casually, maybe too casually, "Who's this Rothschild person?" He snorts. Not the kind of snort that says, "Good question." The kind that says, "Oh, sweet summer child." "They're not a person," he mutters. "They're the weather." You're not sure what that means. You laugh politely. He doesn't. He waves vaguely toward a door labeled private. It's always capitalized in this place, even when whispered. You want answers? You can speak to Mr. Dross. Mr. Dross appears after a pause long enough to question your awful life choices. He's tall in the way that furniture is tall. Sturdy. Permanent. He moves like a man who files complaints about noise in libraries. His handshake is dry and brief. His eyes scan you like he's measuring how much interest you accrue just by existing. You try not to fidget. He leads you through corridors lined with portraits of people who look extremely rich and extremely tired. One of them is holding a telescope but looking into the wrong end. Another is surrounded by documents and one suspiciously smug-looking goat. No one explains. You don't ask. In a side room lit only by a struggling chandelier, he pulls out a map. It's old, yellowed, and more patched than whole. Pins dot it like it's a game, but you don't know the rules. London, Paris, Vienna, Naples, Frankfurt, all 5 with the same name attached. You're looking at a family, Dross says, tapping one pin with the kind of reverence normally reserved for relics or exceptionally good cheese. 5 brothers, 1 father, infinite influence. You ask what they did. He raises a brow. Everything. The word hangs there, bold and a little smug. You try to rephrase. Banks? Sure. Politics? Obviously. Wars? He doesn't answer. Just flips open a drawer and pulls out a ledger so thick it sighs when opened. Every page is dense with numbers, names, kingdoms, chaos. The ink looks fresh. Some of the entries are dated this morning. You blink. He closes it like a secret. Outside, someone sneezes in a way that sounds like a confession. No one reacts. Dross pours tea from a pot that looks inherited. He stirs it with a spoon that clinks like judgment. You don't drink yours. You're too busy staring at a stack of documents stamped with a seal shaped like a 5-pointed star. In the center, the name. Again, always. They owned information, he says, before phones, before trains, before governments could blink. They knew. Knew what? You ask. He smiles like a locked door. Which side would win? Who would fall? Where to lend and where to wait? You lean back, which is a mistake, because your chair chooses that moment to squeal like an underpaid piglet. Dross pretends not to notice. The chandelier flickers. You wonder briefly if you've stumbled into a history lesson or a curse. He stands. Conversation over. You walk back out into the main room. It feels different now, like the air has acquired a tax bracket. You glance around. The clerk doesn't look up. He's writing something with too much intensity. You think it might be your obituary. You step outside into the cold, clutching a name you didn't expect to matter. The street feels narrower. The buildings lean in just a little. You think you hear the flutter of paper, the click of an abacus, the sigh of someone being bought. The wind smells faintly of old coins and silk. You start walking. Somewhere behind you, a pigeon lands on a windowsill. It's holding a note. You meet Mayor Amschel, Rothschild, in the only way you can meet someone who's been dead for 2 centuries through a portrait painted by a man who clearly feared being billed for every extra brushstroke. The painting hangs in a hallway too narrow for comfort, framed in gilt, dust, and the unmistakable aroma of very old money. Mayor looks down at you with an expression usually reserved for appraising livestock or recently baked bread. There's a smug tilt to his mouth, not quite a smile, more like a receipt you didn't expect. He's wearing a coat. Not just a coat, but a coat. Capital C. The kind of garment that might be made from 12 kinds of wool, half a diplomatic agreement, and something unpronounceable. It has buttons that don't button anything, and lapels wide enough to hide state secrets. You get the feeling it's been passed down like a family relic, or possibly a warning. A plaque beneath the portrait reads, Mayor Amschel Rothschild, founder, followed by some dates and the faint echo of someone clearing their throat in a way that suggests reverence and indigestion. You ask the guide, a man with a monocle he doesn't need, and a cough that implies moral superiority, what Mayor was like. The guide adjusts his waistcoat, inhales with ceremony, and says, he was efficient. You nod, like that explains anything. It doesn't. Mayor started with coins, rare ones, old ones, coins that jingled with secrets and questionable provenance. He sold them to princes who liked shiny things and had the attention span of spoiled kittens. But Mayor didn't just sell the coins. He asked questions. He offered discounts. He took notes. Then he started lending. Not money. Not yet. Trust. Credit. Advice disguised as flattery. Eventually, the princes forgot where their own treasuries were. They just asked Mayor instead. He had 5 sons. 5. You're shown their portraits next. They are lined up like military medals, identical in posture and hairstyle, as if painted from a template called Successful European Banker Has Shown. You blink. One of them seems to blink back. You step closer. They all have the same eyes. Sharp, patient, mildly exhausted by your presence. Different names, different cities. But you feel like if you turned your back, they'd switch places just to mess with you. Amschel, the eldest, stayed in Frankfurt to keep the home fires burning and the ledgers balanced. His shoes are polished with the kind of precision that borders on menace. Salomon went to Vienna, where everything is gilded, powdered, or pretending not to be on fire. Karl landed in Naples, which is warmer, louder, and arguably more morally flexible. James claimed Paris, along with a terrifying wardrobe and enough wine to rename a river. Nathan, the most famously terrifying, planted himself in London like a financial oak and refused to be moved by anything short of a monarch. You ask the guide if they were close. He coughs again, this time into a handkerchief that may or may not have seen the Congress of Vienna. They wrote each other, he says, every day. You imagine the letters carefully penned, heavily perfumed with politics, folded in quadrants, sealed with wax and occasional shade. Dearest brother, one begins, your suggestion regarding the Prussian bonds was charming. Incorrect, but charming. Another probably includes a full breakdown of Austrian railroad stocks and a subtle threat disguised as a proverb about goats. The coat appears again in another painting. Different brother, same coat. You point this out. It travels, the guide admits, much like their money. The Rothschild model was simple. Divide, conquer, collect interest. They were in 5 cities but operated as one brain. A polite, calculating, velvet-gloved brain. If one brother sneezed in Naples, the others sent handkerchiefs and adjusted their portfolios accordingly. They moved gold across borders like it was bread, and governments came to them for help, not because they were friendly, but because they didn't particularly need to be. You stare at the portraits for a long time. There's something eerie about them. Not malevolent, just composed, like they know what you owe, even if you don't yet. The hallway creaks behind you. The guide disappears around a corner, muttering something about tea. The air smells faintly of varnish, history, and a warning wrapped in silk. You glance once more at Mayer. That expression. It's subtle, the kind of look that makes you wonder if you're part of the joke or just the punchline. You walk on. You don't look back. You're wandering through the Judengasse, the narrow artery of Frankfurt that coughs up more history per cobblestone than most cities manage in a century. The street is barely wide enough for your shoulders, and the buildings lean toward each other like gossiping grandmothers. Everything smells like wood smoke, boiled onions, and a hint of nervous ambition. People are shouting in a dozen dialects, arguing over prices, relatives, and whether someone's goose is too forward. A boy runs past you carrying a basket of pickles, looking alarmed and slightly triumphant. You move aside just in time to avoid becoming collateral. Above your head, laundry flaps like secret codes in linen. Each shirt, apron, and suspiciously symmetrical sock arrangement seems too deliberate to be accidental. You pause to stare at one collection. 5 identical waistcoats, each pinned to the line at a different angle, swaying with purpose. You could swear they're forming a pattern. Someone's coat flaps twice, then once. Morse code, family tree, financial forecast. You blink, and a woman leans out from a window and yells at you in a tone that strongly implies you've seen too much. You nod and move along. The house you're looking for blends in almost too well. 3 stories of slightly slouched timber and modest shutters, with a door that looks like it's been opened more times than any reasonable life should require. You're told Mayer Amschel Rothschild was born here, raised here, schemed here. It's smaller than you imagined. No gold leaf, no velvet, just the faint suggestion that something important once happened, and might again if the right paper is signed. You try to ask a passing merchant about Mayer's early days, but he's too busy explaining the geopolitical implications of mustard pricing to a chicken. You try someone else. An old woman with a basket of buttons eyes you skeptically, then hands you a damp pretzel and walks off, humming something that sounds suspiciously like an interest rate curve. You eat the pretzel. It tastes like economics and mild judgment. A man next to a barrel of pickled cabbage beckons you closer. He's got a face like a raisin and eyes that have definitely seen a secret or two. You ask him what he knows about Mayer. He nods slowly, leans in, and says, "He counted faster than anyone I've ever met. Once totaled the tax records of the entire block before I finished sneezing." He pauses, and I'm a professional sneezer. He doesn't elaborate. You don't ask. The deeper into the street you go, the more it feels like the Rothschild myth is stitched into the bricks themselves. Children play games that involve pretend banking. One of them is shouting something about dividends. Another one is crying over a failed merger involving marbles and a stolen apple. You try to follow, but the game changes every 30 seconds, and the rules seem to involve yelling, "Consolidate," at emotionally vulnerable moments. You spot a faded plaque near the old synagogue. It mentions mayor, briefly, like an afterthought. Lender, trader, man of calculation. You wonder how someone goes from weighing coins in a cramped ghetto to reshaping the financial arteries of empires. You suspect the answer involves relentless correspondence, an uncanny talent for negotiation, and possibly something to do with those waistcoats. Someone slams a shutter behind you. It startles a pigeon, who promptly drops a small rolled scrap of paper. You pick it up. It's blank, or maybe written in invisible ink. Or maybe it's just a receipt for something you don't understand yet. You pocket it anyway. You pass a bakery where the bread loaves are numbered, and a fishmonger who appears to be quoting bond yields to a trout. It's unclear whether this is traditional or deeply personal. You try not to stare. At the end of the alley, you find a wall where 5 small handprints have been carved into the brick. No names, no explanations. Just the impression of 5 small palms pressed into stone like a promise. You place your hand next to them. Yours doesn't fit. You stand there a while, watching the light shift, listening to the fabric of history rustle above your head. Somewhere, a bell rings. Somewhere else, someone is shouting about a debt that no one remembers borrowing. You walk on, the scent of pickles lingering in your coat, and something else following close behind, the sense that the Rothschilds didn't just come from here, they never really left. You're not sure how you ended up in the back room of a museum that smells like velvet and candle wax, but here you are, surrounded by glass cases full of things that look suspiciously like they have opinions. The floor creaks, in a language you don't speak. The air is heavy with dust that feels curated. Everything is just a little too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you think of contracts signed in blood or overly formal duels where both participants apologize in Latin. The plaque on the wall reads, Mayor Amschel Rothschild, collector of antiquities, currency, and select curiosities, which is a polite way of saying he hoarded small, shiny things like a dragon with a taste for bureaucracy. The first case holds coins. Roman, mostly, though one looks suspiciously French and mildly offended to be here. There, arranged by era, denomination, and presumably the number of emperors who got assassinated during their circulation. You peer closer at a denarius stamped with a half-smiling Caesar and realize his eyes are following you. You try to convince yourself it's just the engraving. You are not successful. The medals come next. Some military, some commemorative, some so specific they feel made up. One is labeled, presented for outstanding fiscal diplomacy during the siege of Ulm, which you suspect is code for, bribed the right person at the right time. Another bears the profile of a prince who looks like he would lose a deputedance, duel to a pastry. Mayer apparently collected these like other people collect fridge magnets with quiet fervor and the occasional scandal. Then there are the buttons. You didn't come here for buttons. No one ever does. But you can't look away. They're displayed in a semicircle under a velvet dome like precious gems or dangerous ideas. Small, round, ordinary at first glance. But the labels tell a different story. Roman legionary, 2nd century. Byzantine general's dress cloak, Napoleonic aide-de-camp, left sleeve. Each one sits in its tiny satin nest, like it's waiting to be sewn back into history. You reach out and pick one up, before realizing you probably shouldn't. No alarms go off, but you feel something shift not in the room, in the air. The button is heavier than it looks, cold, Smooth. It hums, faintly, like it remembers being shouted at in Latin. You hold it longer than you mean to. It starts to feel familiar, like an obligation you forgot to decline. You put it down quickly and wipe your fingers on your coat, which now seems embarrassingly modern. There's a handwritten card beside the display, scrawled in Mayer's own ink. You recognize the looping script from letters you weren't supposed to read. It says, "Objects are evidence. Never trust memory alone," which is either a philosophy or a subtle insult to every historian who ever tried their best. You step back, trying not to make noise. The floor obliges by groaning like it's filing a complaint. A curator appears, wordlessly, as if conjured by your guilt. She adjusts one of the velvet drapes with the precision of someone who owns very sharp scissors and a lot of opinions about lighting. You nod politely. She nods back, then vanishes behind a door that doesn't open for you. The room seems smaller now, or maybe the objects are larger. It's hard to tell when everything in sight is weighed down by significance and mildly judging you for your shoe choice. You circle the cases again, slower this time. A coin glints at you, a metal winks. You ignore them. You glance back at the buttons once more before leaving. One is missing. You're not sure if it was ever there. You tell yourself it doesn't matter, but you check your coat pocket anyway, just to be sure. You follow them through cities that hum with old money and newer mistakes. The brothers, 5 of them, perfectly scattered like an elegant spill of dice, each staked a claim in a different corner of Europe, as if the continent were a game board, and they'd memorized the rules before anyone else got a turn. Their letters fly faster than carriages, faster than sense, sometimes faster than truth, stitching a net across empires so fine it looks invisible until it tightens. You start in London, where Nathan has made himself unpleasantly necessary. The sky is a shade of gray that feels less like weather and more like policy. The streets smell of damp wool, horse effort, and a faint metallic tang that might be ambition or just the Thames trying to be relevant. Nathan's office sits behind a door that looks too small for the kind of conversations it contains. Inside, there's the constant shuffle of paper and men who speak in ratios. No one makes eye contact unless legally obligated. You watch Nathan lean over a desk and quietly bend the future of Britain with a quill and a half smile. Someone brings him tea, which he ignores. He's already had 3 cups and 1 minor government this morning. You barely have time to blink before Vienna claims you. Here, Salomon wears the city like a well-cut coat, tailored, formal, faintly judging your posture. Everything is polished, the marble, the shoes, even the silences. Salons echo with waltzes and policies whispered behind fans. People greet each other by kissing cheeks and stabbing backs, though not always in that order. Salomon glides through it all with the confidence of someone who has financed both sides of the same negotiation and charged interest to each. The air smells like perfume, powdered wigs, and bureaucracy held together with ribbon. Then, Paris. James is younger, but not softer. His corner of the world is louder, faster, more likely to accidentally start a revolution before lunch. His house has too many mirrors, and none of them show you anything you want to see. He greets you with a grin that makes you check your pockets. The wine flows freely, the words even more so, but every laugh seems just slightly off, like it's been rehearsed for investors. You sit at a dinner where no one mentions the war out loud, but every spoonful of soup tastes like contingency planning. Someone toasts to love. Someone else toasts to liquidity. You lose track of whose glass belongs to whom. Naples hits you like a humid secret. Carl has made himself comfortable among the chaos, lounging in a villa with views of everything and curtains that know when to stay closed. Naples smells like espresso, citrus, and decisions made 3 weeks too late. The streets are full of arguments that sound like music, and music that sounds like pleading. Carl works in shadows and smiles, using charm as currency and occasionally switching languages mid-sentence just to watch you stumble. The bank here is tucked behind a bakery and staffed entirely by men who look like they have day jobs as poets and night jobs as smugglers. You ask a question, you're handed a cannoli and a forged shipping document. And then there's Frankfurt again, the root, the pulse. Amschel, the eldest, didn't leave. Someone had to stay behind and water the tree. The house is quieter now, but not silent. Papers still move, deals still hum. He answers his brother's letters with ink that smells faintly of resignation and cinnamon. You walk through the rooms and feel the echo of decisions made too early to be appreciated. He keeps the family ledgers like scripture, bound in leather and fingerprints. Each city leaves a mark. You arrive in each one feeling like a visitor and leave feeling slightly mortgaged. The brothers don't move much, but their influence does, slipping between palaces and parliaments, wearing disguises made of credit and courtesy. You try to keep up, but they are always one carriage ahead, one letter sooner, one coin deeper in someone else's vault. Somewhere between capitals, you start to wonder if they sleep, or if they've invented a sixth brother who handles the resting. You're tired. The kind of tired that settles behind your eyes and sets up a small, well-funded bureaucracy. The kind of tired that smells faintly of bond interest. You keep moving. The brothers are already in the next city, already at the next table, already negotiating the terms of your arrival before you know you're going. London doesn't just rain, it lectures. The streets glisten with judgment, and the fog curls around your ankles like it's checking your credit. You're not sure if the city is welcoming you or quietly appraising your resale value. Either way, you're here. And so is Nathan Rothschild, somewhere between the Bank of England and wherever confidence is minted. Nathan walks like he knows something you don't, and to be fair, he absolutely does. His coat swings behind him with authority, and from time to time, he dips his hand into the pocket and rattles the coins inside like a man reminding the universe who's actually in charge. They clink with purpose. These are not coins for buying lunch. These are coins that rearrange governments. You catch sight of him at the Royal Exchange, barking numbers to men in top hats who nod like their necks are rented. He talks fast, moves faster, and seems perpetually surrounded by a cloud of scribbled notes and people pretending they understand what he just said. He leans into a conversation like he's about to propose marriage or demand collateral. Sometimes both. Someone whispers that he made a fortune in 24 hours betting against his own information. Someone else swears he once bought a railway just to cancel it and spike the bonds. You hear that he carries the price of a medium-sized duchy in his waistcoat, just in case. You don't know what's true, but none of it feels impossible. You trail behind him to a dinner party hosted by a man whose house has more fireplaces than relatives. The silverware is engraved with initials no one explains, and the wine is older than most of the guests. Nathan arrives late, drops his hat onto a servant like it's a stock certificate, and sits down without looking where. The Prime Minister is at the other end of the table, already pale. By the soup course, Nathan has corrected 3 economic projections and adjusted a tariff policy using only a bread roll and a well-timed sigh. He doesn't shout. He doesn't need to. His voice is quiet, clipped, like he's editing the room as he goes. Someone mentions a colonial investment opportunity. Nathan nods once and says something in French that makes a baron choke on his fish. By dessert, the conversation has shifted to opera, but somehow he's still winning. After dinner, he walks alone through the streets, his cane tapping out an irregular rhythm as if even his footsteps are in negotiation. You follow at a safe distance, just in case proximity comes with interest. He pauses once to buy a paper, flips through it with visible contempt, then folds it under his arm like it owes him money. A small boy runs up and offers him a flower. Nathan gives him a coin instead. You don't hear what he says, but the boy salutes and runs off like he's just been promoted to admiral. He disappears down an alley that smells like ink and unpaid taxes, and you think he's gone, until a carriage pulls up beside you and the window rolls down. It's him, somehow. "You look like someone trying to understand," he says, amused. You open your mouth, then close it. He nods approvingly. "Good. Understanding is expensive." He tosses something, a gold coin, old, heavy, worn at the edges, and the carriage rolls off before you can respond. You hold the coin. It's warm. You think about what it's worth. Then you think about what it means. That's the real cost. And Nathan knows it. Behind you, Big Ben chimes like a closing bell. You walk into wood on the night, with your hand in your pocket, and the weight of something that doesn't quite feel like money anymore. You're crouched behind a carriage that smells like hay, ambition, and something deeply Victorian involving liniment. The alley is narrow, the bricks suspicious, and the man across the street has been staring at the same lamppost for 12 minutes, like it owes him a confession. You're definitely not supposed to be here, but no one stopped you yet, which is either a blessing or a very clever trap. Above you, the city murmurs in hushed tones. Footsteps, horses, the occasional expletive in German, and 1,000 secrets trying to pretend they're not. You think you're alone until a soft flutter lands on your shoulder and you freeze like a guilty ledger. It's a pigeon. It stares at you with one beady eye full of purpose. You whisper something polite. It ignores you and drops a tightly rolled slip of paper at your feet like a bureaucratic insult. The script is tight, spidery, and alarmingly precise. It's a stock report from Vienna. You look around. No one seems surprised. Apparently, this is normal. You blink. The pigeon pecks your cheek, not aggressively, more like a judgmental tap. Then it flaps off, trailing a faint smell of breadcrumbs and state secrets. You pick up the paper again. It's real, accurate, dated this morning, which would be impressive if Vienna weren't several hundred miles away and aggressively horse-reliant. You've just witnessed something faster than any royal dispatch, postal service, or well-bribed courier. You've stumbled into the Rothschild information network, and it's covered in feathers. You wander farther down the alley, where a small door opens without being knocked on. Inside, it's quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that's been told to behave. A man with ink-stained sleeves sits at a desk surrounded by wires, scrolls, tiny rolled maps, and more pigeons than seems hygienic. He doesn't look up. "Lost?" he asks. "No, you lie." He whistles sharply, and another pigeon swoops down and drops something into a metal tray. A sealed envelope, marked confidential, which in this case might mean volatile. The man unrolls it, makes a mark in a ledger, and hands the envelope off to a boy who vanishes like he was trained by shadows. "Do you want something?" the man asks. You ask about Rothschild. He chuckles. "Once. It's not kind. They built this," he says, while others were still riding in circles with wax seals. You sit down without being invited. The chair squeaks like it's under surveillance. He tells you about the code books, pages and pages of phrases turned into numbers, numbers turned into nonsense, nonsense turned back into profit. He shows you a drawer full of little metal cylinders, each containing messages that have changed the course of wars, treaties, and at least one marriage proposal involving artillery. Pigeons coo in the rafters above, like tiny, judgmental librarians. You ask how many birds they have. He shrugs. "Enough to bankrupt a small country." You don't ask which one. You suspect he's already forgotten it. Messages arrive every few minutes, from Paris, Naples, Frankfurt. A bird from London arrives in a minor panic, covered in soot and indignation. It drops a message, pecks at a biscuit, and immediately begins grooming itself like a creature who just adjusted interest rates. The man leans in. "Speed wins," he says. "Not strength, not charm. Speed. Information before anyone else, before even the people making it know they've made it. That's the game." You glance at a chart on the wall that seems to map everything. Troop movements, wheat prices, rainfall. There's a colored pin labeled rumor and another labeled confirmed. The room smells like feathers, ink, and very expensive anticipation. You thank him. He doesn't reply. He's already reading a message from Brussels that arrived 5 seconds ago and will be acted on 5 seconds before the market realizes it ever existed. Outside, the city keeps moving like it's in charge, but you know better now. Somewhere above, pigeons fly in silent formation, carrying fortunes in tiny capsules. One of them circles back and lands on your arm. It eyes you once, pecks your sleeve, and waits. You're not sure if you've just become part of the system or if it's already decided what to do with you. Either way, you hold still. The party is the kind where the chandeliers look like they've seen things and the wallpaper costs more than your annual sense of security. Somewhere in a borrowed ballroom near street, James's diplomats mingle with duchesses, and the air smells like citrus, candle wax, and carefully contained betrayal. You're not on the guest list, but you're holding a glass, and that's half the battle. People talk in circles here. No one answers questions directly, and everyone has a cousin in the East India Company. You overhear 4 different toasts to stability, each with varying degrees of teeth. A woman in an emerald dress murmurs something about Prussia, and the man beside her laughs like he's just doubled his portfolio. You find yourself drifting toward the terrace, not for the air, but for the plausible deniability. That's when someone leans in too close and says it quiet, but not that quiet. Bought half the debt, you know, before the ink dried on the defeat. You pause, not sure if you misheard or if the champagne has finally developed opinions. You glance over. The speaker is smiling at nothing in particular, swirling his drink like it's a prophecy. You try to respond with your eyebrows. He shrugs, sips, and vanishes into the crowd like a particularly smug ghost. You're handed another glass. It tastes like something expensive had a secret affair with regret. Behind you, someone laughs a little too loudly, and then immediately pretends they didn't. Everyone pretends they didn't hear anything, including you. But now the sentence clings to your coat like smoke. You make your way back into the ballroom. It's hotter now, or maybe just heavier. The candles flicker with diplomatic urgency. Someone mentions the Battle of Waterloo in a tone usually reserved for weather. There's a general consensus that it was decisive and unpleasant, and also last Thursday. Someone else jokes about Napoleon's boots. You watch as 3 men in tailored suits shift their weight at the same time. You spot Nathan Rothschild across the room, casually sipping wine with a face carved out of marble and arithmetic. His eyes move too fast for comfort, calculating the interest on every word he hears. You're suddenly aware of just how recently this party was scheduled, and how deeply uncomfortable it is that so many financiers are present and so few military men. There's a rumor circulating now, quiet as lace, that Nathan had advance knowledge of the battle's outcome, that his messenger pigeon arrived 24 hours before the government knew, that he walked into the stock exchange the next morning looking like bad news and sold until the market collapsed in a performance that deserves an orchestra. Then, when every other investor had retreated into panic and cheap whiskey, he bought all of it, pennies on the pound, like a man picking over the ruins of a battlefield and finding gold in the mud. Officially, it didn't happen. Unofficially, it keeps happening. You stand near a tray of olives and try not to think about how wars can be turned into spreadsheets. A woman beside you says, "Of course it's a myth," and then immediately excuses herself before anyone asks follow-up questions. The music swells. A violinist with ambition cuts the tension like a scalpel. You try to catch Nathan's eye, but he's already speaking to someone else, a lord or a ghost, or both. His smile is almost kind, which somehow makes it worse. By the time you leave, your drink is empty, your head is full, and your pockets feel strangely heavy. You didn't buy a single bond, but you still feel owned. The streets outside are calm, like they haven't been informed yet. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls. You wonder if it's for victory or debt maturity. Either way, someone already profited, and you're probably holding the receipt. You're seated at a table that appears to have more silver than necessary and more wine than wise. The chandelier above you twinkles like it knows something you don't, which it probably does. It's been hanging over these conversations for decades. The man to your left smells like lemon oil and imperial confidence, and the woman to your right hasn't blinked since the appetizers arrived. Her pearls rattle every time someone mentions interest rates. Dinner begins with soup, a pale golden affair that tastes like melted diplomacy. Someone across the table lifts a spoon and murmurs, "Ah, France," as if the liquid itself carries the weight of revolutions and state-backed default. You try to sip politely, but it dribbles slightly onto your sleeve. No one says anything, but 5 monocles twitch. The fish arrives next, arranged so delicately it feels rude to eat. You cut in anyway and nearly cause an international incident. Prussia, someone whispers dramatically, as though this trout is personally responsible for the reorganization of Central Europe. You try to nod knowingly. The sauce tastes like military parades and subtle betrayal. You're not sure whether to chew or negotiate. The conversation drifts effortlessly between war bonds, grain futures, and the moral flexibility of sovereign debt. One man recounts how he once underwrote an entire navy by mistake and was too embarrassed to cancel. Another boasts about owning a percentage of a canal. You're not sure which canal. You're also not sure he's joking. By the third course, someone raises a glass to continuity, which is apparently a euphemism for, "We still own most of this continent." Everyone drinks. You do, too. The wine is older than your understanding of monetary policy. A servant appears at your side with a salad so aggressively curated it feels like a museum exhibit. You poke at a particularly judgmental piece of endive, while the man across from you explains how debt, properly managed, is really just the art of making other people comfortable with your ambitions. He smiles, dabs at his mouth with a napkin stitched with Latin, and proceeds to explain the difference between moral hazard and polite denial. You consider feigning a fainting spell, but the roast arrives and smells like triumph. "England," someone declares. You assume they mean the meat, though it's unclear if the reference is culinary, geopolitical, or psychological. You try not to look directly at the gravy. It might be planning something. Dessert is delicate, unnerving, and covered in gold leaf. "The Pope," the hostess announces, without a trace of irony. You're not sure if she's referring to the cake, the debt, or the guest at the far end of the table who hasn't spoken, but whose ring everyone keeps kissing. You take a bite. It tastes like sanctified sugar, an implied obligation. As coffee is poured, the table relaxes the way a wolf pack might after agreeing not to eat each other yet. Contracts are slipped into conversation like compliments. No one raises their voice. No one ever needs to. The real power here is woven into the silence between the courses. You realize you haven't used half the cutlery provided, but at this table, every fork has meaning. One is for salad, one is for fish, one is for gently nudging nations toward fiscal compliance. You reach for the wrong one and are met with a soft cough from your neighbor that manages to feel legally binding. By the end, you're full, confused, and carrying the distinct feeling that you've accidentally co-signed a naval fleet. A toast is made to long partnerships, which you suspect translates to, "Your grandchildren will still be paying for this." Everyone claps politely. Someone's monocle falls into their wine. You step out into the night with a stomach full of metaphors and a receipt written in 4 currencies. The air smells like cigars, ink, and legacy. You're not entirely sure what just happened, but you're fairly certain it will be very difficult to undo. The drawer is in a desk that's too ornate to sit at and too haunted to ignore. It creaks open with the sound of old decisions and freshly ironed consequences. Inside, Letters. Dozens of them, possibly hundreds, tied with ribbons that look like they used to be stern. The paper is crisp, expensive, and smells faintly of ink, starch, and control issues. You reach in and immediately feel like you've touched something alive. You choose one at random. It's addressed to Nathan from James, or maybe to James from Nathan. Hard to tell. The handwriting is aggressive in a very polite way, slanted like it's mid-negotiation. You open it carefully, like it might trigger a financial avalanche. The first sentence reads, "Brother, I am disappointed but not surprised," which sets a tone both fraternal and terrifying. You read on and realize it's equal parts banking update, passive-aggressive complaint, and coded threat disguised as weather commentary. You keep reading. Your eyebrows begin to climb, then retreat, then climb again. You don't fully understand what's being discussed, but you're pretty sure it involves at least one war, 3 currencies, and a shipment of candlesticks with suspicious provenance. The entire letter pulses with intent, and you can almost hear a ledger quivering in the background. The postscript simply reads, "P.S. Tell Amschel that if he delays another remittance, I will send him nothing but spoiled Bordeaux until the end of time." You don't know who Amschel is yet, but you already pity his wine cellar. You open another letter. This one's from Salomon to Karl, and starts with a detailed report on Austrian bonds, and ends with a 2-page rant about someone named Heinrich, who apparently keeps sneezing during meetings. In between, there's a veiled comment about Neapolitan shipping routes, and an aggressive underlining of the phrase, "liquid capital," not liquid excuses. Each letter is its own novella, a blend of financial data, cultural gossip, veiled insults, and the occasional suggestion that one brother might be trying to outmaneuver the others. Lovingly, they don't write to communicate. They write to win. You imagine them at their desks in Vienna, Naples, Paris, London, all penning these barbed little dispatches like monarchs with fraternal issues. You reach the bottom of the stack and find one that's different. The handwriting is shaky, older. It's Mayer, the father, writing not to instruct, but to remind. The tone is calmer. He writes about trust, about blood, about the family name being both shield and sword, about how gold can lose value, but reputation, once spent, is bankrupt forever. You sit with that line a moment longer than you mean to. Then, suddenly, the craving hits. Power, influence, the need to adjust a trade route or collapse a market just to see who salutes. It's not a hunger, exactly, more like a thrum beneath the skin. You shake it off, but not completely. The letters have a smell, now ambition left in a drawer too long. You hear voices in the hallway, footsteps. The drawer won't close quietly. You nudge it shut with the care of someone returning a loaded pistol to its case. The desk settles with a sigh that sounds like old money forgiving your intrusion just this once. You step away, heart quickening, not from fear, from proximity. These weren't letters. They were blueprints for empires, for dynasties, for control, passed in paragraphs and folded into envelopes that rewrote continents. You didn't understand half of what you read, but you understood enough. The room smells like roses, powdered ambition, and whatever cologne is legally required for men over 50 who collect titles. You're in a hall where echoes wear suits, tall windows, red velvet drapes that look like they were embroidered by someone paid entirely in land, marble floors, gold trim, and a ceiling mural of cherubs pretending not to be bored. There's a line of carriages outside so long it has a valet rotation schedule. You're not sure how you got invited, but there's a program in your lap with embossed lettering and a crest that seems to feature a goose holding a ledger. The name beneath it is something like His Serene High Debtworthiness Baron von something hyphen something. And while it might not technically be a title recognized by any parliament, no one seems eager to say that out loud. A man steps forward to receive his honors. He bows just enough to acknowledge gravity. Someone in a powdered wig announces his achievements: stabilization of northern trade flows, discreet resolution of a Portuguese banking hiccup, and that time he bought 3 villages and rebranded them as rustic liquidity assets. There is applause, but only the kind that doesn't wrinkle sleeves. The Baron smiles. He's wearing a medal shaped like an IOU and a velvet sash the color of generational advantage. He sneezes delicately into a silk handkerchief, which, upon closer inspection, has his net worth monogrammed in gold thread along the edge. You clap politely and try not to imagine how many horses that handkerchief is worth. The Rothschilds aren't just buying influence now. That would be too simple. They're purchasing identity, landed titles, coats of arms, something that makes them look less like international bankers and more like aristocrats who accidentally invented modern finance. You hear someone whisper that James is now a baron of the empire. Another insists Nathan is already mingling with dukes on a first-name basis. A third claims one of the brothers just bought a forest for the symbolism. None of them are wrong. There's a buffet table groaning under the weight of roast peacocks, pickled metaphors, and 5 varieties of wine that all smell like tax exemption. You linger near the candied figs, trying to eavesdrop. 2 gentlemen argue over whether it's appropriate to refer to a Rothschild estate as a manor or a financial redoubt. You sip something pale and expensive and wonder if you're supposed to curtsy to the dessert. At the far end of the hall, there's a portrait being unveiled. It's one of the brothers, Carl, maybe, seated on a throne-like chair made entirely of account ledgers, wearing a robe that's been stitched to resemble a balance sheet. The expression is stern, but with a faint smile, as if he just approved a loan that's going to start a minor war and a major profit. Someone nearby sighs. They've earned it, and no one disagrees. That's the trick. The money is already old enough to have opinions. Now the names are catching up. No longer simply Rothschild, they are von Rothschild and de Rothschild, depending on the room, the crown, and the tax treaty. You watch another gentleman receive his medal and nearly trip on the length of his own name. A boy with a tray catches him with the grace of someone who's trained for this very moment. The room laughs politely. Everything is polite here, even the ambition. Later, as you're leaving, a doorman nods at you with a kind of weary deference. You look back once and see a footman straightening a chair like it's a national treasure. The whole building hums with a quiet kind of permanence, like it's been claimed not with cannons, but contracts. You step into the cold, the titles still echoing behind you like a well-financed lullaby, and you realize something. This isn't just about power anymore. It's about belonging. The ballroom floor gleams like a freshly printed banknote polished within an inch of its inheritance. Chandeliers sway gently above, dripping light like liquid assets. Everywhere you look, silk rustles, jewels glint, and subtle empires shift position behind fans and champagne flutes. You're not entirely sure how you got in. Someone might have mistaken you for a diplomat or an eccentric count. You didn't correct them. Now you're here, balancing a glass of something fizzy and suspicious, watching the financial elite twirl to the sound of strings and quiet speculation. The music is light, but the stakes are heavy. No one dances just to dance. Every turn, every dip, is choreographed diplomacy. You see 2 men waltzing with their wives while simultaneously negotiating a shipping monopoly with their eyes. A woman in a blue gown spins past you, laughing like she just closed a loan on a continent. Across the room, you spot her. She's in burgundy silk and has the posture of someone who's never been denied credit. Her gaze flicks over you with casual efficiency, and you feel briefly assessed, audited, and categorized. She smiles. It's not flirtation, it's acquisition. You take a step back and realize with horror that your shoes are not nearly shiny enough. You owe her something now. You don't know what, but the terms are probably unfavorable. You try to mingle, but conversation keeps doubling back into finance. A man with impressive sideburns tells you about a railway he's funding in a voice like he's describing a child he half raised and then leveraged for capital. Another insists gold is passé, and the future is in subtle influence. You nod. You have no idea what that means. Someone hands you a pastry shaped like a small nation-state. You eat it without asking questions. The Rothschilds are here, of course. Not all of them, you assume they take turns, appearing at these things like a royal family with a diversified portfolio. Tonight, it's James, or maybe Carl. You can't be sure. They have that Rothschild look. Sharp suit, sharper eyes, and the demeanor of a man who once bought a mountain just to ruin a rival's view. He isn't dancing. He doesn't need to. He's holding court near a mirror, talking to 3 men and a woman who are all nodding like their fortunes depend on it. They probably do. Occasionally, he laughs a short, efficient sound, like a decimal point snapping into place. You drift toward the refreshment table, which is less a buffet and more a declaration of edible dominance. Gold-trimmed figs, miniature pheasants, something that may be both cheese and metaphor. You eat out of necessity and mild confusion. Suddenly, the music slows. A quadrille begins, and the dancers rearrange like currency across a geopolitical map. Someone asks you to join. You try to decline politely, but are swept in by a gloved hand and the force of etiquette. You attempt the steps. You are not good. But your partner smiles like your debt just matured with interest, and you realize it's not about grace, it's about presence. You're a placeholder in a ledger, and that's all that's required. As you spin, dip, and attempt not to step on Luxembourg, the room blurs into a sea of silk and strategy. You overhear snippets, secured bonds, imperial subsidy, a duchy and 2 banks, non-negotiable. Someone laughs too hard at the word collateral, and you nearly fall into a countess. When the music ends, you're breathless and disoriented. Your dance partner disappears before you can thank or invoice them. You stand still, sweating slightly, wondering how many handshake deals you just witnessed and whether any of them involved your future. You glance down at your shoes. They're shinier now, scuffed just enough to suggest experience, but not wealth. You look up, and the woman in burgundy is still watching. She lifts her glass. Congratulations, you've been noticed, and possibly appraised. Paris hums like a harp strung with tension. Cobblestones click beneath boots and carriage wheels. Whispers pour from shuttered cafes, and somewhere in the distance, a crowd murmurs the rhythm of change. The sky is overcast but doesn't dare rain. Even the clouds are watching the market. You're standing in a salon where the ceiling is so high it has its own weather system, and the chandelier above you could fund a modest uprising. Everyone is speaking in quick, caffeinated French that somehow sounds both conspiratorial and casually bored. The room is filled with velvet, wit, and enough perfume to stun a small republic. James Jacob, if you're being formal, is the Rothschild here. Paris is his stage, and he moves through it like he built the floorboards himself. You spot him across the room, gesturing with a silver cane he doesn't need. He's laughing with a duke and a newspaper editor, while quietly negotiating grain futures through eye contact. His waistcoat is embroidered with restraint, but his smile is embroidered with victory. You try to leave. You really do. But the exit is blocked by a man with a monocle too confident for its own face, telling a joke about guillotines that is far too recent to be funny. People laugh anyway. The way you laugh when the person holding the checkbook finds something amusing. You nod politely and attempt to slide past, only to be intercepted by a woman holding a glass of red wine and a firm belief in economic justice. She's arguing beautifully, persuasively, and loudly about the ethics of compound interest, her earrings swinging like ideological pendulums. You duck behind a curtain. The curtain, to your surprise, is fluent in exchange rates. You lean in and hear numbers whispered like bedtime stories for gold bars. The fabric smells like old perfume and new money, and you begin to wonder if everything in this room is somehow complicit. You stay behind the curtain longer than is socially acceptable. The drapes don't mind. Outside, Paris is on the edge, not of fashion or cuisine, but of combustion. Bread is expensive, opinions are louder, and every pamphlet flutters like a warning. The revolution never really ends here, it just changes outfits. And yet, the French Rothschild branch continues to thrive. While buildings smoke, their windows gleam. While crowds shout about liberty, their ledgers whisper about dividends. You finally emerge from the curtain, hoping no one noticed. They did. But this is Paris people pretend not to notice for sport. You rejoin the salon just as someone announces that the Bank of France has blinked. There's a ripple of interest, followed by several discreet scribbles. A man with the nose of a hawk and the posture of a bond market makes a quiet exit, and 4 others follow within seconds. You take a canapé from a silver tray shaped like the Alps and chew, thoughtfully. It tastes like wealth and vague foreboding. The woman beside you starts reciting a poem about inflation. You nod. You think it might rhyme in Latin. Jacob is now at the piano. Of course he plays. Of course it's perfect. The piece is dramatic, a bit stormy, and entirely calculated. You catch him glancing at the room, watching expressions shift like interest rates on a bad harvest. As the evening winds down, someone toasts to stability, which causes 3 people to cough into their gloves. You sip champagne you didn't ask for and realize you've lost all sense of whether you're a guest or a pawn. Later, walking through streets that pulse with lamp glow and the distant thud of barricades being built just out of sight, you wonder how long a family can sit calmly at the center of a spinning coin. You pass a newsboy shouting headlines you can't quite understand. You understand enough. Naples hits you like a sun-warmed slap. The air is thick with garlic, gossip, and a kind of theatrical defiance that makes even the pigeons seem sarcastic. The streets twist like they're trying to hide something, and based on the number of side eyes and unlabeled crates moving around, they probably are. You're told the Rothschild office is just up ahead, housed in what used to be a minor noble's villa, or maybe a former seminary, or maybe both, depending on who you ask and how much espresso they've had. The building itself leans slightly, like it's overheard too much. Paint peels in a way that feels luxurious, not lazy, and the windows are too clean to be accidental. You push open the heavy door and are immediately hit by a draft that smells like old velvet and newer money. The lobby is a strange mix of banking formality and Mediterranean improvisation. Marble floors, grand staircase, and something slithering near the radiator that's either a misplaced ribbon or a local economic analyst. You don't ask. A clerk hands you a clipboard without eye contact. Another nods at you like you've just lost a duel. You hear the sound of quills scratching, papers flipping, and the unmistakable scurry of clawed feet somewhere behind the paneling. At first, you assume rats. Then, you see it. A lizard, long, green, and disturbingly confident, skittering along a ledge with a rolled-up note in its mouth. It pauses, stares at you, then disappears into a vent labeled Accounts Receivable. You look around for someone to confirm this. No one flinches. You wander deeper into the building, through corridors that seem to shift slightly depending on your level of debt. The Rothschild presence here is quieter than in the other cities, more sun-faded, but still powerful. You pass a boardroom where men argue in 4 languages and one dialect made entirely of eyebrow gestures. The walls are lined with oil portraits of people who either invented banking or demanded tribute from it. You stop in front of a door with a brass plaque that reads, Carl. No title, just Carl. Inside, a man in a crisp jacket and suspiciously clean shoes is arranging gold coins into what appears to be a territorial map. He doesn't look up when you enter, just says, Naples isn't Paris. It breathes differently. You nod like that. Makes sense. He finally looks at you, offers a thin smile and a slice of dried fig. You take it because declining food here might be interpreted as war. Carl explains the lizard, unprompted. Apparently it started as a joke, some intern claiming the creature kept entering trade values into ledgers. Then the numbers started making more sense. Now it has a desk, unofficially. They named it Giuseppe. It's been right 3 quarters in a row. You ask if they're serious. Carl shrugs. Better record than half the royal advisors. Later, you're led upstairs, past windows that overlook a city humming with contradictions. Steam rises from street vendors, coins clink in church fountains. And below, on a shaded balcony, a meeting unfolds between a Rothschild assistant and a man with a mustache so serious it must hold a government position. Documents change hands, so do olives. You find a quiet office with a broken fan and a ledger open to a page titled Speculative Assets, Kingdom of Two Sicilies. There are notes in the margin, volatile, potential, and ask Giuseppe. The sun starts to set in thick orange waves. You leave the office, stepping over another lizard you're now convinced is on salary. Outside, Naples is louder than ever. Bells ring. Children scream laugh. Someone fires a musket into the air for no reason you can understand. The Rothschild building stands still. It does not need to shout. It owns the walls the sound bounces off. The auction begins with an overture of coughs, shuffles, and the creaking of too many expensive shoes against marble. You're seated between a woman who smells like vanilla and veiled threats, and a man fanning himself, with a document that might legally bind a small nation. The room glows gold, not metaphorically, but literally. The wallpaper has flakes of it. The chandeliers drip with it. Even the air feels wealthy, like it charges rent for being inhaled. A bell rings once. Bidding commences. The first item is a horse. Not just any horse, but one descended from some royal steed who may or may not have kicked Napoleon. It's sleek, disdainful, and clearly aware it's worth more than half the guests. Bidding starts with coin and ends with a velvet pouch tossed casually onto the stage. It jingles with a confidence that suggests emeralds. You're not wrong. The pouch is opened. The gems glint. Someone claps. You're not sure if it's the buyer or the horse. The next item is a jewel. Oval cut, encased in something unnecessarily baroque. It has a name longer than most treaties. Before the auctioneer can finish saying it, someone raises a paddle and offers 4 Andalusian stallions, lightly, trained. This, apparently, is acceptable. A gavel comes down. You blink. You're not sure if you just witnessed corruption or a really enthusiastic barter system. Beside you, the vanilla-scented woman leans in and whispers, "It's all about liquidity. Horses count." She winks like that explains everything. You nod like it does. A Rothschild enters late. You know because the energy shifts subtly, like the room just got re-inspected for creditworthiness. He doesn't bid. He doesn't need to. He chats quietly with the auctioneer between lots. They laugh. A man behind you calls it facilitated diplomacy. You hear the phrase repeated 3 times in 3 accents. One person says it with awe. Another says it like it tastes bitter. The third says it and immediately sneezes into what appears to be a diamond-studded handkerchief. You're beginning to lose your grip on scale. A silver tea set is sold for a vineyard. A violin once played for a dying czar is exchanged for mining rights in Bohemia. There's applause after each transaction, but it's polite, almost apologetic, as if everyone's in on the fact that this entire event is more theater than trade. The real deals, you suspect, happen in the hallway, or behind fans, or written on the inside of gloves. At one point, someone tries to auction off a political favor. The auctioneer pauses. There's a moment of theatrical discomfort, followed by several raised paddles. It's sold before the discomfort finishes crossing the room. You sip something bubbly and complicated. It tastes like fruit and foreign policy. You think you spot Giuseppe the Naples lizard perched on a ledge near the ceiling, but it might just be the exhaustion or the lighting. The auction ends with a ceremonial item, a ledger from the early days of the family's empire. Pages thick as bark, ink faded but still legible, names, loans, locations. It is not for sale. It's held aloft for reverence, not revenue. People bow their heads slightly, like it's a relic or a warning. Outside, as guests disperse into night carriages and rumor, someone laughs too hard at a joke about tariffs. You catch fragments of conversation, collateralized loyalty, strategic stables. Vienna never saw it coming. You walk home with the sense that you've just attended a performance staged in currency. You're not entirely sure what changed hands, but something did. Influence, perhaps. Or maybe just the illusion of it. You pass a fountain on the way back. There's a coin in it. It's emerald. You sit in a drawing room that smells like bergamot, soft judgment, and old upholstery that's definitely seen secrets. Lace curtains filter the sunlight into delicate accusations. Somewhere, a clock ticks in a tone that suggests punctuality is moral. A maid glides in with a tray of teacups so fine they could double as diplomatic threats, and then they arrive, the Rothschild wives. They do not enter. They arrive. Each one is draped in fabrics that seem to imply alliances. No loud jewelry, just the occasional flash of a brooch that could pay off a province. They smile the way experienced duelists do, charming, but only because bloodstains are hard to get out of silk. One of them gestures to the seat across from her, and somehow you feel both welcomed and cornered. Tea is poured. It smells expensive and slightly dangerous. You reach for the sugar, and three of them clock the movement like it's a test. You leave the sugar alone. The first 10 minutes are pleasant. How are you finding Frankfurt? Isn't the weather unreliable? Have you heard about the Austrian cousin's newest marriage proposal disaster? You answer cautiously, aware that every question is a probe in a velvet glove. You mention that the city seems lively. One woman, Henriette, maybe, nods slowly and says, "Yes, markets do that before they snap." You're not sure she's talking about the city anymore. Someone offers you cake. It is delicate, layered, and frosted with what may be sarcasm. As you chew, the conversation shifts seamlessly from pastries to interest rates. One of the women, spooning jam with the precision of a tax auditor, casually quotes a clause from the London banking charter mid-story about her neighbor's awful hat. You try to keep up. You fail gracefully. They discuss cousins and crown princes in the same breath. One recounts a dinner with a French ambassador where she corrected him on inflation projections using only her salad fork. Another mentions, with a sigh, that the Neapolitan branch still insists on handwriting their ledgers. There is a moment of silence for this inefficiency. You take a sip of your tea and try not to feel like an open ledger yourself. Then come the questions, not aggressive, just insurgical. How long have you been in finance? Do you believe in fixed versus floating interest? What do you think of the political situation in Spain? And asked, with a tilt of the head and a smile that's far too kind, how solvent is your conscience? You answer something about diversification. They nod, but you're not sure if that was the test or just the warm-up. One of them leans in, eyes glinting like she's just shorted a duchy. "Men fight wars," she says, "but we pick the winners." The others murmur their approval. Someone cuts a slice of cake with emotion that could cleave through bureaucracy. They never raise their voices. They don't need to. You can feel the gravity of them. The quiet certainty that if the men run the banks, the women have already balanced the books. Someone brings out correspondence. You see letters in neat, commanding cursive notes on timber rights, marriage alliances, and a curious footnote about moving silver through Bavaria disguised as church donations. You laugh nervously. They don't. Time passes strangely. You don't remember when the teapot was refilled, or when the sun dipped behind the the drapes. But eventually, they stand, gathering their shawls and finishing each other's sentences like synchronized financiers. One places a hand on your shoulder as she passes. It's gentle. It's final. It's the kind of touch that closes a deal without needing ink. When you leave, you realize you've spoken less than 10% of the time, and still, somehow, they know everything. The door isn't labeled. It doesn't creak. It simply allows you through, like it's been waiting, which is almost worse. You're in a hallway beneath a Rothschild estate, though calling it a hallway feels dishonest. It's colder than it should be. The walls breathe slightly. You're already sweating, but only in your palms, which seems like the kind of thing this place would enjoy. At first, it just looks like a wine cellar. There are barrels, dust, a neglected bottle of something French and judgmental. You turn left when you probably should have turned back. That's when the air shifts. Something subtle. A current of knowledge thick enough to trip on. You pass a doorway carved into stone. No hinges, just shadow. You step through and immediately forget what time it is. The room, if you can call it that, is vast, windowless, and lined with shelves that curve inward as though trying to keep secrets to themselves. Books, scrolls, ledgers, maps, receipts, things with brittle spines and terrible memory. The air smells like ink and wax and something else, something sharp and metallic that isn't quite blood, but isn't not blood either. You're not sure if you've gone back in time or forward, only that the candle in your hand flinches when you exhale. You brush your fingers across the spine of a book labeled Confidential Trade Agreements. 1812, 1815. It hums. Not literally, but your skin tingles like you've just touched something plugged into the European economy. Next to it is a handwritten treaty between two kingdoms you're fairly sure no longer exist. Someone has underlined a clause about water rights in blue ink. It's dated yesterday. That's when you realize nothing here is past tense. You keep walking. A drawer marked collateral, unspoken, is filled with locks of hair, signed portraits, and a single playing card stained with something too dark to identify. Another shelf holds coded messages, most of which are in languages you don't recognize. One is in perfect English and says only, "Tell her the silver was moved at dawn." You don't know who her is. You don't want to. You find a table with an open journal, neat lines, severe handwriting, and a sentence midway down that reads, "Naples remains volatile. Josephine denies knowledge. Lizard confirmed." You close the book slowly. A candle goes out behind you. You turn too fast and the shadows rush in like they've been practicing. The silence is absolute now. You try to retrace your steps, but the shelves seem taller, closer. The path you took no longer exists. You're almost sure you passed that same bust of a man with no name 3 times. Each time he looks more smug, or less dead. Eventually, you find a door that wasn't there before. It's smaller, humble. It opens with a sigh. You exit into another hallway, this one warmer, brighter, with polite sconces and a faint smell of citrus. A servant passes you and nods like he didn't just see you crawl out of a portal to Europe's subconscious. Back in the main house, there's laughter, music, someone arguing about tariffs over port wine. You sit down in a stiff chair with an embroidered cushion and try to breathe normally. A woman in pearls hands you tea and says, "Found the library, did you?" Like she's commenting on the weather. You don't answer. You just sip and listen as the party carries on. Somewhere below, the candle relights itself. The first time you hear it, it slips in behind a joke. A too casual aside at a dinner table, laced with wine and laughter and something acrid underneath. You smile, because everyone else is smiling, but your throat tightens, like it knows what's coming. Someone lifts a glass and says, "Well, of course they control everything, and no one corrects them." The chandelier flickers. You try to chalk it up to ignorance. A badly worded sentence, a lazy shorthand. But the second time, it's less casual. It arrives in pamphlets, posters, speeches with too much applause in the wrong places. The word Jew is spoken like a diagnosis. The name Rothschild is spat like it should be washed out with soap. And suddenly, history has teeth. You walk through a market in Vienna. Someone is selling caricatures, exaggerated noses, greedy fingers. A cartoon Rothschild clutching the globe like an orange he's about to squeeze dry. You want to tear them all down, but there are too many, and they keep reappearing like mold after a storm. You ask a vendor who made them. He shrugs and says, "People like to know who's really in charge." You want to scream, but the air is thick with false certainty. The family is still building, still financing railroads, schools, hospitals, opera houses. There's a scholarship named after Mayer in Frankfurt that sends poor students to university. There's a housing initiative in London that keeps hundreds warm through winter. In Paris, someone shows you a letter from a Rothschild lobbying for Jewish emancipation laws, written in ink that smudged because he was writing too fast, too urgently. But it doesn't matter. Not to the ones who've already decided. You sit in a salon and listen to two men debate whether Jews should be allowed to own property, while drinking brandy purchased with interest from a Rothschild bond. You excuse yourself before you throw up. A woman stops you on the stairs and says, "It's just politics. Don't take it personally." You want to ask how exactly you're meant to take it. You see the danger in the simplicity. One name, one family, one scapegoat. It's easier than facing the chaos. Blame is a balm for uncertainty, and money always looks suspicious in the wrong hands, especially when those hands aren't the ones people were taught to trust. You try to speak up at a gathering, mention the philanthropy, the economic contributions, the decades of quiet support behind revolutions and social reform. But someone cuts you off with a knowing smile. "Ah," they say, "you're one of them." You're not. But that doesn't seem to matter anymore. The Rothschilds don't stop. They host dinners, fund research, push quietly against the rising tide. But you can see it on their faces, in their posture, the weariness behind their eyes. It's not just unfair, it's corrosive. You hear a boy on the street call someone a Rothschild as an insult. He can't be more than 8. The word is already a weapon in his mouth. Later, you're handed a letter. It's from Salomon Rothschild to a minister who threatened to revoke Jewish banking rights in Austria. It's calm, eloquent, devastating. He writes, "If I am not your equal in faith, I hope at least to be your equal in contribution." You fold it carefully and feel your chest tighten. That night, you walk past a cathedral. Someone has scratched the Star of David into the stone, surrounded by coins drawn in chalk. A child is tracing them with a stick, humming, and all you can do is keep walking, teeth clenched against a silence that feels older than money. It starts with a blot of ink, barely anything, a tiny smudge at the bottom of a page signed somewhere between Zurich and mild indigestion. You're not even sure which brother did it. Could have been James, could have been Carl, could have been an assistant named Klaus with poor lighting and a tendency to sneeze at critical moments, but the signature is off, and the world notices. You're in the drawing room when it happens. Someone bursts in mid-toast, holding a telegram, like it might detonate. Did you authorize the Portuguese rail guarantee to be, "They don't finish"? They just point at the paper, like it insulted their lineage. Someone else grabs it, squints, sniffs, and declares the signature compromised. The word hangs in the air like smoke. You haven't even had your second croissant. Outside, the market begins to twitch. By midday, it's no longer a twitch. It's a full-body financial spasm. Telegraph lines sizzle across Europe, like veins in a caffeine addict. Amsterdam wants clarification. Vienna wants reassurance. London just wants someone to pour gin into the punch bowl and tell them it's all going to be fine. You stand in a corner, holding a plate of sliced pears, watching four men debate whether this is the beginning of the end or just an incredibly expensive typo. The Frankfurt office sends a bird. The bird looks tired. You try to read the message it carries, but it's written in a cipher that resembles someone sneezing into Latin. A clerk assures you it says, "Don't panic." But he won't meet your eyes when he says it, and his left eyelid is twitching. By afternoon, the rumors have metastasized. A duchess in Paris tells her maid the Rothschilds are bankrupt. A banker in Naples insists war is imminent. A man in London sells all his holdings and invests in umbrellas, which isn't even metaphorical, he's literally buying umbrellas. Hundreds of them. His logic is unclear, but so is the market. Meanwhile, Mayor's great-nephew calmly lights a pipe and asks if anyone remembered to send the correction telegram. No one has. 3 people leave the room at once. One of them is crying. The pipe smokes judgmentally. The correction is eventually sent, 17 times, in 5 languages. Some are delivered by pigeon, others by men on horseback who look like they've already composed their own death letters. You help seal one envelope with wax that smells faintly of lavender and doom. Someone mutters, "At least it wasn't Prussia this time," which is not comforting. By evening, things begin to stabilize. Stocks climb back from the ledge. The Duchess retracts her scandal over oysters. The umbrella man is quietly escorted out of the exchange. A butler serves roasted chestnuts, and no one talks about the smudge. Officially, it never happened. Unofficially, there's now a framed memo in the London office that reads, "Sign slowly." You sit in a quiet room with Nathan's youngest cousin. He's drinking something clear and suspicious. He looks at you and says, "We didn't build this machine to be delicate, but even the strongest wheels rattle if you grease them wrong." You nod like you understand. You do not. The night ends with a string quartet and slightly too much champagne. Everyone pretends the day was just another Tuesday. You stare at the blot on the telegram in your pocket and wonder how much power a few millimeters of ink can carry. The answer, apparently, is most of Belgium. Someone proposes a toast to clarity. No one laughs. The invitation arrives on paper so thick, you mistake it for a cutting board. Gold embossed, perfumed with something that smells faintly like inheritance and slightly like cinnamon. You half expect the paper to whisper to you. Instead, it just says dinner, 7 o'clock. Do wear something serious. You arrive early because you thought there might be a coat check. There isn't. Instead, a man in tails silently removes your jacket and replaces it with a glance that evaluates your shoes and quietly recalculates your social value. You follow the sound of cello music through a hallway so long you start to wonder if the Rothschild estate is shaped like a regretful snake, or maybe a well-fed one. The dining room is cathedral-sized, but warmer. Probably the wood paneling, or the fireplaces, or the fact that the chandelier is giving off actual heat and not just judging you from above. Around the table are at least 4 people you've seen in newspapers, and one you recognize from a diplomatic scandal involving a treaty, a goose, and too much Madeira. No one introduces anyone. They all already know each other. Someone you think might be the finance minister of Belgium is laughing too hard at a joke about tariffs. Next to him, a woman with a title too long to pronounce is sipping champagne like it owes her money. You sit next to a man who doesn't blink and smells faintly of gunpowder. His cufflinks are tiny globes. He doesn't speak, but you get the sense he could end a war with a nod. The food arrives in silence. Silver domes lifted in perfect synchrony. You're handed a menu printed on what might be pressed silk. The first course is seasonal equilibrium. It turns out to be soup, but it tastes like budget negotiations and distant truffle. Across from you, a Rothschild cousin leans back in his chair like he's about to rewrite fiscal policy. He mentions something about copper, yields in South America, and everyone nods like they've all owned a small mine at some point. Someone makes a casual joke about nationalizing the railway system. The laughter sounds expensive. By the second course, you realize no one is actually eating. They pick, they swirl, they occasionally stab something green with a fork that costs more than your rent. The conversation moves like a chess match played on multiple boards, some of which are invisible and on fire. You try to contribute something about trade. They listen politely, as if watching a child explain taxes. A toast is proposed. It's not to peace or prosperity. It's to continuity. Everyone drinks. You start to notice that certain names never come up. Monarchs are referred to as our distant cousins. Wars are unfortunate investments. Nations are discussed like chess pieces valued, maneuvered, occasionally sacrificed. Dessert is a tower of candied figs and something you suspect might be conceptual art. It's shaped like a collapsed empire. No one comments on it. You try a bite. It tastes like history and orange peel. When the coffee comes, it arrives with a ledger. Not for you, God. No, but for someone 3 seats down who signs it without looking. You see a glimpse of numbers so long they blur. Someone mumbles about coal futures. Someone else corrects them, it's gold now. Or maybe influence. The dinner ends with a quiet nod. No one stands until a Rothschild does. When they finally rise, it's like being released from a very beautiful, very velvet prison. You walk out into the night, full but not nourished. Europe, you realize, might run on constitutions and ideals, but it's lubricated by dinners like these. And you're still not entirely sure if you were a guest or an investment. You're not sure if it's the fog, the violin, or the sheer quantity of velvet. But this funeral feels more like an opera than a burial. The air is thick with incense, mourning, and quiet. A speculation. Somewhere behind you, a bishop coughs into a lace handkerchief, and someone else whispers something about Swiss bonds. You try not to look like you're eavesdropping, but your ears are hungry, and etiquette is on holiday. The casket is mahogany, polished so perfectly you can see your confusion in it. Draped in cloth so dark it might be absorbing light, it glides past you on the shoulders of men whose expressions were carved in marble long before they were born. No one stumbles, no one breathes. There is a rhythm to the procession, like it's been rehearsed by kingdoms. A row of kings follow, actual monarchs, not distant cousins or honorary barons, real ones. You recognize at least 3 from coins. They move stiffly, like grief is something they studied for but never really passed. One of them bows. Another mutters a blessing that sounds suspiciously like a loan condition. Behind them walk the bankers cloaked in black, but still glinting with gold watch chains and understated arrogance. You watch as one discreetly adjusts his cuff and accidentally reveals a treaty. It folds back into his sleeve like a secret going home for the weekend. And then there's the goat. No one explains it. No one questions it. It's wearing a little ribbon and walking with tremendous purpose, like it's attending the most important board meeting of its life. You try to ignore it. You fail. It makes eye contact. You look away first. The ceremony begins in Latin and ends in several currencies. The eulogies are efficient. The brother was brilliant, disciplined, and could calculate compound interest in his sleep. He once financed an army and a hospital in the same afternoon. He negotiated peace between 2 duchies while eating pickled herring and never spilled a drop. You wonder if you're mourning a man or a financial institution. Velvet chairs line the front row, throne-like things, too soft to be trusted. You sit in one. It swallows you whole. A woman beside you sniffles into a black lace veil, and you realize she's weeping into shares of a textile company. You offer a respectful nod. She does not return it. You suspect she outranks you financially and emotionally. A boy begins to sing. His voice is so pure it makes your bank account feel guilty. The sound floats up to the ceiling, which is frescoed with what might be allegories or just expensive confusion. You try not to stare at the cherub holding a ledger. After the final hymn, There's a silence so absolute it feels prearranged. Someone clears their throat, and suddenly everyone stands like a tide changing its mind. The casket is lifted again, carried out. The kings follow, then the bankers, then the goat. Outside, the carriages wait. You overhear a quiet discussion about railroad investments and flower arrangements. A man places a single lily on the steps and mutters something about interest rates. A child asks if death can be deferred. No one answers him. You walk away slowly, unsure whether you've attended a farewell or a transition of power. The fog curls around your ankles, bells toll in the distance, and somewhere, softly, a market opens 5 minutes early. The goat climbs into a carriage like it owns the road. You do not follow. You step into the gallery and the air hits you first. Not the scent of varnish or polish, not the faint must of old paper or timber, but the peculiar weight of 1,000 gazes pressed into canvas, oil, and gold leaf. It's the kind of air that makes your shoulders tighten, even if you've spent the last 3 hours convincing yourself you were ready for this. The floorboards creak beneath your shoes as if protesting your intrusion, though the echoes are swallowed immediately by the thickness of the room. Every surface reflects someone who built empires, financed kingdoms, and quietly rearranged the balance of the world while you were learning to fold a napkin correctly. The first portrait catches your eye immediately. Mayor Amschel Rothschild, staring at you from across the room with an intensity that suggests he remembers every penny ever owed and every promise ever broken, even the ones that never existed. His eyes are dark, almost liquid, with a sharp edge that says he could calculate your net worth before you could even finish blinking. You shift slightly, hoping it's just the angle, but the figure does not forgive slouching. Not today, not ever. Beside him, a painting of one of his sons, possibly Nathan, possibly James. It's impossible to tell. At first glance, leans a little forward in his frame, posture perfect, lips pressed so thin, you wonder if he's sucking in the secrets of the world through them. The portraits form a silent army. Some are seated, some standing, some casually holding objects that are somehow both ordinary and terrifying. A ledger, a quill, a globe balanced precariously on a hand that looks far too steady. Their expressions are uniform, calm, disciplined, and impenetrable. Not a single smile, except perhaps one faint curl at the corner of a mouth that might be amusement or pure disdain. It's hard to be certain. You catch your reflection in the glass of a frame and startle at how small you feel. Your presence seems comically incongruent, like a coin dropped into a fountain reserved for gold ingots. You move further in, careful not to bump a frame, careful not to breathe too loudly. A wall of canvases looms ahead, each one whispering a history you don't understand fully but feel deep in your chest. In one, a young boy counts coins with fingers so precise you imagine he is memorizing them for an eventual empire. In another, a woman arranges flowers, her gaze so steady you suspect she is plotting treaties as she smiles politely at a table she will never join. Each piece carries an authority that is both mesmerizing and terrifying, the kind that makes you wish for a simple wall with only landscapes and sunsets. A hush falls, though no, one is spoken, and you realize the portraits do not just observe, they appraise. You notice tiny details now. The slight tilt of a head that might indicate skepticism, the faint tightening around an eye that seems to track your heartbeat. You try to imagine what it would be like to live in a room like this, where every gesture, every breath, every choice is weighed against the quiet judgment of generations who measure not with emotion, but with legacy. The thought makes your own hands feel clumsy, insufficient. You touch nothing, though every instinct in your body wants to reach for a corner of a frame, test the reality of it. Then you hear it. A cough, subtle, polite, but it reverberates too strongly in the stillness to be ignored. Someone is behind you. You pivot quickly, too quickly, and your foot nudges the edge of a rug, which protests with a sharp whisper of wool. The sound seems exaggerated, amplified by the gallery's heavy silence. Whoever coughed does not speak again immediately, but you feel the shift in the air, a reminder that you are an intruder, a guest, and a minor calculation in a room full of historic figures who do not forgive error. You back toward the door slowly, your eyes flicking from frame to frame. Some of the paintings seem closer now, as if the eyes have leaned in just slightly while you weren't looking. You wonder if one of them just blinked, a faint, deliberate movement meant only for you. You pause. Maybe it did. Maybe your imagination is overactive, or maybe centuries of discipline are finally testing your nerves. You straighten your spine, realizing that the only way out is forward, that a retreat would be noticed even in your absence. The final wall is the heaviest. It is crowded with generations, each face echoing the last, each eye sharper than a ledger line. You realize you know nothing about them personally, yet you feel every expectation they ever set down in ink, every risk they calculated, every empire quietly grown. Your throat tightens. Your hands itch to be empty of the world, to hold nothing, to measure yourself against the weight of these legacies, and fail miserably. The cough comes again, closer this time, and your pulse matches the rhythm of your step toward the door. A final glance backward, a careful inhale, and you take the exit. Behind you, the room is silent once more, still full of eyes, still judging, still alive in a way that is older than money, older than debt, older than anything you will ever be. You step out into the hall, your heartbeat echoing in your ears, the weight of centuries lifted slightly but still palpable. The portraits wait for the next visitor, and you know the eyes will follow, even in your imagination. It is time to leave. You step into the hallways, and the air carries a scent that is both familiar and impossible to place. Old parchment, polished wood, faintly of coffee and ambition. The light is muted, filtered through curtains that have seen it in centuries and decided not to complain about dust. Everything here is enormous, every corridor stretched like it's measuring time itself, and yet you feel the weight of absence more than presence. The empire has shifted. Governments rise and fall. Wars flare and fade like sparks over dry wood. Yet the building itself, walls, floors, ceilings, stands indifferent, stoic, and impossibly full of echoes. The ledgers are closed now, the ink faded in places, but you swear they still hum. It's not a sound you hear with your ears, but one that vibrates in your chest, in the soles of your feet, the careful rhythm of your heartbeat. You walk past the counters where coins once clicked and rolled like a quiet applause. Now they are dusted, arranged with reverence, sometimes catalogued, sometimes left to their own devices. The marble floors beneath your shoes seem to remember footsteps that no longer exist and whisper when you step too heavily. You pause, feeling the years weigh against your body, against your awareness, as if every footfall might be recorded for the record books of ghosts. Portraits line the walls, but they are different here, not accusing, not active, but quiet, patient. Some eyes follow you still, but only when you pretend not to notice. They lean into their frames in ways that feel almost contemplative, like observers of the slow unraveling of a world they once could have steered with a single signature. You stop in front of Mayer's own image. His expression is less sharp than before, softened by the centuries. You wonder if the faint lines around his mouth were ever intended to smile or simply to endure. A room ahead is half museum, half archive. Glass cases hold objects of impossible delicacy. Medals, coins, buttons, quills, carved with such precision, they seem almost indecent in their perfection. You pick up a small token of gold, cold and heavy, and feel the urge to balance it in your palm like a test of gravity. It is not yours, never was, yet it carries the memory of fingers that held it 100 years ago. Fingers that calculated, gambled, and built invisible bridges across the continents. You set it down before it claims more than your attention. The hallways twist like a memory, some corners unlit, others overflowing with soft golden light that doesn't so much illuminate as acknowledge. You hear doors close in rooms you cannot see, and footsteps echo behind you, though you are alone. Somewhere, a ledger sighs. Somewhere else, a clock ticks too loudly. Somewhere a cabinet clicks, as if something inside is shifting, settling, adjusting itself to the rhythm of a world that has long stopped consulting it. You think you catch a whisper of a transaction, half conversation, half dream. A bank opening in Vienna, a railroad extension in Paris, a quiet promise in Naples, and they are all happening still, somewhere beyond your eyes. You move toward a window. The city outside has changed, but the light falls in the same way, slicing across polished floors and faded carpets. A pigeon lands on the sill, unafraid, its head cocked, as if inspecting whether the building still hums. It does. You watch it hop once, twice, then take flight, leaving a shadow that lingers longer than it should. You are reminded that what they left behind is more than walls, more than art, more than wealth. It is a quiet pulse that survives because it must, not because it knows it is admired. The final corridor stretches before you. Dust motes swirl in sunlight like slow, careful dancers. You reach a door marked simply Archives and hesitate. Inside are the papers no one dares open, the ledgers that once shifted the tides of nations. You step closer. The air hums around you. You can almost hear a ledger sigh, the delicate shiver of ink on paper remembering its purpose. It is closed and yet alive. It will outlast your lifetime, and probably yours too. You turn to leave, knowing that you have walked not through a museum but through intention itself, through the residue of genius, discipline, and relentless calculation. The halls are silent now, almost solemn. The world outside continues in its chaos, in its noise, in its forgetfulness. But here, behind the walls and in the hum of the ledgers, something endures. Something has always endured. And you, briefly, have been a witness to it. You step into the light of the hall outside the building. It is cold, but it does not care. You feel the hum fade slowly behind you, or maybe it follows. You do not look back. It always hums. You wake up with the faint smell of ink and dust clinging to your clothes, the kind of smell that makes you question whether the world is waking up or just remembering itself. The morning light filters through a window that seems older than reason, casting long shadows across a floor you don't recognize, but somehow feel familiar. You sit up slowly, aware of a letter in your hand that wasn't there before. Or maybe it was, and you simply never noticed. The paper is crisp, the edges sharp enough to cut lightly if you're careless, and the ink smells faintly metallic, like coins, long spent but never forgotten. You read the words, once, twice, 3 times. We never left. There is no signature, no flourish, just the statement, simple and insistent, as if it has been waiting for you across decades, centuries, or some measure of time you no longer trust. You stare at it, the phrase hovering in the air like smoke, smelling faintly of secrecy and spent power. Somewhere in the back of your mind, the hum of ledgers begins again, quiet, insistent, like a heartbeat beneath the city. You place the letter down, and the paper quivers slightly, as if acknowledging your doubt. The streets outside your window are alive and indifferent. Cars hum, people murmur, pigeons strut, and ignore everything of consequence. And yet, you feel a weight pressing gently against your chest, the sense that somewhere behind the hum, behind the clicks of keyboards, the flash of news alerts, the rhythm of global commerce, a presence persists. Names whispered on forums, cited in speculative diagrams, hidden in footnotes and legal filings, all of it pointing back to a family that is part legend, part ledger, part impossible human architecture. You wonder if the letter was meant for you, or if it simply found a convenient vessel. You walk through the room, touching surfaces as if they might answer questions that have no words. Shelves lined with books that look untouched for decades, objects preserved with a reverence you can't entirely decipher. Each one a quiet witness to calculation, strategy, and occasionally chaos disguised as order. You think of ledgers that hummed beneath your fingers in another time, of rooms lined with portraits whose eyes followed every tentative step. You realize, sharply, that the hum is not just in the papers or the walls, but in you now. A window catches your eye. You lean against it, watching the world stretch away in predictable disorder. People are walking, talking, trading, negotiating, sometimes failing spectacularly at the smallest tasks. Somewhere, someone buys a house. Somewhere else, someone sells a promise. You see the pulse, the rhythm of things continuing, and you imagine it guided, nudged, whispered into line by hands long gone from the visible stage. And you think, maybe they never left. Maybe the hum beneath the hum, the quiet insistence, the invisible hands, they are still here. You pick up the letter again. The edges feel heavier this time. Or maybe that's your imagination adjusting to the notion that the message is larger than the page. You consider the words, "We never left." They are both comfort and challenge. They insist you pay attention, that you remember that influence is not always visible, that power, like a shadow, exists even when the sun is gone. You fold the letter carefully, as if preserving not just the paper, but the truth within it. The room feels smaller now, but only because it is full of history that insists on being acknowledged. You pace, aware of the silence that is not silent, of the echoes that do not fade. Somewhere behind a wall, you imagine a ledger opening, a pen scratching, a calculation completed quietly, unnoticed, enduring. You sit again, holding the letter against your chest, and for the first time in a long time, the hum becomes a rhythm you can almost follow, like footsteps across a city you thought was yours but never really was. The letter lies on the table now, your fingers brushing it once more before you rise. You step toward the door, uncertain, aware that the world outside continues as if oblivious, and yet carrying a presence that is patient, deliberate, unyielding. You feel the weight of history behind you, the invisible architecture of power and patience, the quiet insistence of a family whose name can be whispered, theorized, feared, or admired. You are still here. You are still asking, and you believe them.